On this podcast, you'll find interviews with high-performing, successful individuals in life sciences. On a weekly basis, we cover their proven methods, principles, strategies, and mindsets to implement new technologies that scale to meet the needs of people in our world.
Welcome to the Life Science Success Podcast. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Don, and I'm a consultant in life sciences. I help companies manage complexity and increase performance. I also recently started right at the very beginning of the year, we kicked off a new digital media marketing company that's doing things like this. So that's doing podcast interviews like this. In addition to that, though, we're setting up webinars. We're helping companies with their digital media presence in websites and things like that. And so, feel free to look us up online. The very short web address for this company is d3dm.com. So feel free to visit the web page and check us out there. Today on the Life Science Success Podcast, my guest is James Hammett. James is the founder and CEO of Vistum Labs. Vistum Labs is a med tech diagnostic company helping to detect, treat, and track neurological disorders. So with that, welcome, James.
Thank you for having me, Don.
Yeah, it's great to have you on. And it's funny because whenever I talk to somebody on the neuro side, so often the comments that I get, and I've gotten this before from Jojo Platt most recently, was that, hey, look, there aren't many people that focus in on a lot of things that we touch on. And so, it's great to have somebody else focused in on this and talking a little bit more about neuro today.
Thank you so much. I think that it's a pretty small field.
Yeah, agreed. So can you tell listeners just a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So my name is James. You know that already. What you don't know or might not know is that I'm a serial entrepreneur in the neurotech space specifically. So I build businesses that have everything to do with neuroscience, and that means helping patients who suffer from neurological disorders. And it also means helping doctors treat neurological disorders. So in the past, I helped solve paralysis problems with mind control technology. That was very fascinating stuff. And it inspired me actually to develop a new technology now where we are diagnosing neurological disorders using a very similar approach. Ideally to prevent paralysis for those people.
Very interesting. So, I know you just touched on a little bit, but one of the things that I read in your bio was that you've developed several technologies, and so I just wanted to, maybe just explore that a little bit more with you. What sort of things have you developed, up to this point?
That's a great question. I have a whole binder of ideas. It's literally called my book of ideas. It has a label on it and everything. I have about 100, 200 ideas in there. They're not all good. And so what I will do is pick my favorite ideas, the ones that I think are the most viable, and I will do a quick test, patent them, and after the patent is granted, which can take, a year or so, then I like to build a business around that company. So something that I started while I was in college is a mind-controlled wheelchair company. It's called Neurable. The company is no longer just building those wheelchairs. Now it's more of a B2C company. We make headphones that you can control so you can listen to music based on your mood. Then you can change the song if you don't like what you're listening to, things of that nature. It's very powerful stuff. And so that's something that I'm on the patent for. And then most recently, I came up with this idea of seeing how people's brains may be damaged based on what they see in pictures. So with my current invention, I am showing people pictures and I'm looking at how their brains are responding to those pictures. It's very early. So, I've acquired some IP from some universities. I haven't actually developed my own patents yet in this space, but that's what I'm excited for. And that's what I'm doing.
Wow. It sounds amazing to me, but also very, just sci-fi, I guess, that somebody's out there, working on these kinds of things as well. what made you interested in this particular space?
That's a great question. So my parents are both physicians, and I, as a result, grew up feeling like I needed to do something to help patients. And at the beginning, that meant helping patients who are suffering the worst. In my opinion, full and partial paralysis are some of the worst problems to have. And so that inspired me initially for that previous venture. And what I realized while building that business was that, in fact, a lot of the people who end up in the wheelchair are there because of, in my opinion, preventable neurological disorders. And of course, you have patients who are suffering because of neurological disorders who don't end up in the wheelchair. So when I had that aha moment and I realized that basically half of the people that I'm serving, in fact, could have benefited from better diagnostics, maybe did not need to end up in the wheelchair, I realized, oh my gosh, there's a whole opportunity here that I can help these patients with. And so with that company, what we were doing is we were looking at how brains are processing things like arrows on a keypad or written instructions. If the person's brain lit up, so to speak, we knew that what they saw was what they liked and was what they wanted to do next, or it wasn't, right? So then I thought, well, maybe it's possible that there's visual disruption caused by neurological disorders. Maybe neurological disorders change how people interpret pictures. And so that was the whole idea behind Vistum Labs, which is Visual Stimulation Labs. And I'm building that company. We've already done 2 clinical studies. When we had the first set of results confirming my hypothesis, I was very, very excited.
Yeah, and one of the things that I saw on your website for Vistum Labs was that you state in your mission statement, we see a standard of care where patients, clinicians, and researchers can quickly and easily identify neurodegenerative diseases in the office, enabling opportunities to intervene and save individuals and families and communities. Can you tell us a little bit about, how it's enabling that? What do you see as the pathway to get there?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So it's one thing to have an idea. It's something very different to have that idea be implemented in society. It requires, in my opinion, 3 drivers. One needs to be the outcome, right? It needs to make people's lives better. That's huge. That's the main reason that, an entrepreneur like myself would be involved in medicine, right? It's typically a hard field. You can make a lot of money in fintech, so why look at medicine? It's primarily about the patients. The second is to make it a tool that is useful to the doctors. You have to recognize, I believe, that the doctors are the main users of the technology. You can create an amazing technology that helps patients, but if you don't have the doctors on board, if they don't know how to use it with their patients, then it doesn't reach the patient. So that's really step number 2. And step number 3 is making sure that there's a financial incentive behind it. So, you could have the best product in the world. Some people maybe will buy it, but if you want it to be accessible to people, and in healthcare, accessibility is a big problem, you have to make sure that it's something that can be covered by insurance. And so that's something that's been a very big strategy of ours. So the way that we are helping the patient is we've created a tool that the doctor can use in the very first patient visit that allows the doctor to figure out what the next intervention that they need to do same day, as opposed to, waiting for a PET scan appointment and then waiting for those results and interpreting them afterwards, assuming the patient can pay for a PET scan. So you get the same intervention, you get the intervention today, same day. And then third, and this is super important, you're not just seeing how the person will, progress into a disease, you're seeing how it affects their life. We are measuring how somebody is able to see their environment, and we're able to correlate that with their cognitive abilities. So if you give the patient treatment, you can actually see if it's working. And that's huge. That's a game changer. And so by ticking all 3 of these boxes, what we've set up is an environment where patients can walk in, they can get the treatment, the doctor can check a week later, a month later, make sure that it's working. And now you have a patient who's receiving successful early intervention, and they don't end up in a wheelchair. They don't end up with the long-term cognitive deficits. One thing that I like to point out to people that they don't usually know is that we've had interventions for Alzheimer's disease as early as the 1990s. The reason that we don't hear about them, we don't talk about them, is because they're not cures. So if you give it to a patient late stage in the disease, it's not going to really do anything. And then second of all, we haven't been able to give these drugs to patients who are early into decline because at the moment, we actually wait for patients to forget what year it is or what country they live in. It's ridiculous, but that is the gold standard to know that somebody has a cognitive disorder. And so what we're making possible is early intervention. I think that's the thing we help with the most.
Yeah, I was nodding a bit because so I have a family member who right now is suffering from dementia, and same exact test was given to her, and essentially they walked in the room and said, can you tell me who the president is? Can you tell me what year it is? And I was so
Yeah,
surprised that these were essentially the baseline for the test, and how severe it is, or anything else doesn't seem to be a real factor, or even like any sort of true understanding from my perspective. And and so then the next day or a couple weeks later, all of a sudden you could ask her the same questions and get different answers because of the fact that her mind's continuing to change. um, and she is still learning and taking things in. And I don't know. To me, it's this is one of those moments where you just kind of say, couldn't we do better? Um, so yeah, hopefully
agreed.
Vistum Labs will enable that, right?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things you're bringing up is, yeah, if the patient doesn't know what year it is or what country they live in or, who the president is, are they going to get better? Are they going to answer that question better by taking a pill? Um, and if you have patients who are all, getting that question wrong, how do you know who's worse? There's no way to know who is suffering which stage of disease with these types of questions. There's no way to know that the therapy is working. There's no way to know that the therapy is not working. So it's a total guessing game, and it's really sad because when you wait for someone to get these questions incorrect, you've obviously waited way too long.
Yeah. So maybe let's pick apart a little bit of what Vistum Labs is focused on. So you mentioned Alzheimer's a minute ago. I mentioned dementia. Um, so I mean, I'm assuming that those are part and parcel in scope.
Similar.
But in addition to that, are there other things that your company will enable testing for, or an in-office diagnostic for?
Yeah, so my target is all neurological disorders. I like to talk about Alzheimer's because it's very popular, it's very common. A lot of people can relate with it. As you pointed out, though, there is this big family of dementia, and Alzheimer's is only part of that. There are over 100 different types of neurological disorders. And you have things like vascular dementia, Lewy body dementia, prefrontal dementia that look a lot like Alzheimer's disease. And so if you're asking these questions, not only are there the problems that I mentioned earlier, but how are you going to know which specific dementia it is? Because they have different care plans. They have different therapeutic options. So these are very important questions. And as a result, the vast majority of patients today are misdiagnosed. For the first 10 years of their medical care of neurological disorders,
Wow.
they are misdiagnosed. That is the way that things are. And so it is very sad. And, you asked me, well, what is my target? So my target is across all of these neurological disorders. Started with schizophrenia and with Alzheimer's disease, because these are ones that have pretty well documented damage in the parietal lobe of the brain, which is one of the areas that I like to study. But we're also interested in looking at stroke, traumatic brain injuries as early other neurological disorders, and going beyond that into Parkinson's disease, differential diagnosis for these various forms of dementia. Um, I would say that those are our main targets at the moment. We do plan to be pan neuro. Our device actually, as it is, it doesn't say that you have Alzheimer's disease. That's not how it works. What it does is it runs a whole battery of tests on your brain, and it figures out actually how you'll perform in certain memory tasks, how you'll perform on the PET scan, the MRI, what a spinal tap would show. That way, the physician has all the information that they need to figure out what this disease is. So we're not pigeonholing ourselves. We're not taking a narrow focus, even though our clinical studies have been mostly in Alzheimer's and schizophrenia.
Wow. I mean, and looking on your website, it looks like it involves like a VR device. Is that correct?
That's a good question. There is no VR device yet, but in the future, we think that that will be very important. Our device right now, I mean, we're not a hardware company, it's all software, is a video. So we show a video on a monitor. That's why, in the VR world, it's probably better because you can make sure the patient is looking at the thing. If it's a monitor, they could be looking away, and that might disrupt the effectiveness of our test.
Yeah, I'm glad you clarified because whenever I looked, I was like, well, it looks to me like it could be a VR device. So I'm glad you clarified that for
Well,
all
my
of us.
previous company, Neurable, was very heavy into the virtual reality space. I actually created a video game where you're L from Stranger Things, and you have to escape from a government facility using only your mind. No keyboard, no joystick, nothing like this. And you're picking things up in the game, you're typing into a keypad, all with brain activity. And that was done in VR. That was a really cool experience.
Yeah. I, I, I mean, EEG capabilities have been around for a long time, and having had them, done long ago versus, now, where you see just a little sensor that they put on your forehead is just, I mean, an amazing, transformation in that technology. And I can only imagine where this and testing could go with Vistum Labs. So, yeah.
Thank you. Well, I'm not a hardware person. I mean, I'm an electrical engineer by training, but um, I think that the most exciting innovations in EEG right now are actually not on the hardware side. I think it's on the software side. It's going to sound crazy, but most people have studied EEG where patients have their eyes closed, like this, and they
Hmm.
just sit there and you just record the brain activity. And it makes no sense to me because most of the brain's neurons are related to the visual cortex. If you have your eyes closed, you're essentially turning off half the brain. Not totally how the brain works, obviously, but when you turn off or you destimulate a part of the brain, now what you're introducing is chaotic behavior. One person's brain is going to act very different from someone else because now they're not being driven by their environment. So you close your eyes, I close my eyes. Our brains are going to be doing very different things. But if we're both watching the same video, then our brains are going to have at least the same visual tasks. And so that's how our technology works. We look at how your brain and my brain interpret the same video in a way that's slightly different. And as crazy as it sounds, that is brand new type of technology.
Wow. So, in terms of the stage that you're at, I mean, you mentioned, a couple clinical trials. What do you envision is the path that you will have to go through to, before we see a device out in the public?
That's a great question. So I have a team that I just hired as of January. So they've been with me for almost a month for some, a little bit more than a month for others. Um, and what we're doing is we are taking our product as we have it now, which is a research product, and we are iterating on it with neurologists. So, we're speaking with the people who are going to be helping the patients. We're showing them our data. We're showing them what we have. We're showing them the concepts. So the question now is, at what point will they feel like what we have is enough? And the amazing thing is, in these first meetings that we're having in this, customer discovery business, is in the first meeting they're saying, "This is what we need. Give it to us now." So I think the answer to your question is very soon. I have a target internally. I would like to field test the product with at least 20 neurologists before I decide to double down and just finish the delivery. But we're imagining launching this system in hospitals as early as September of this year. And FDA approval, deployment to private care facilities, we're anticipating that for Q1 of next year. So this is all happening very, very quickly.
Sounds like it, yeah. Especially given, normal device development. There's normally this lack of acceptance, I would say, in a lot of newer technologies, in a lot of different spaces, but it doesn't sound like you have that same resistance in your area. Which more or less brings me to
Well,
my next question. I mean, where do you see the biggest
yeah.
opportunities for Vistum? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, and also, the comment that you made earlier, I would say that we still have the same obstacles as other medical devices. I speak with big pharmaceutical companies who want to do work with us, hospitals that want to do work with us. And one of the biggest obstacles for us, barriers for us, is that we haven't studied with a large enough patient data set as what they would like. For example, we have studied our paradigm with about 150 patients, and there's a pharmaceutical company that told us that they want to re-engage with us when we've reached 200. So I'm thinking like, okay, well that's not even a full study. That's a half of a study maybe, or a pilot. But either way, they have these benchmarks, and so those benchmarks are very important to hit. In terms of the biggest opportunities for us, though, I would say that there is such a difference between our system and what is currently standard of care, which is what we were talking about earlier with the questions and the subjective diagnosis. I mean, our system is about 80% accurate right now, and that's for clinical endpoints, which is not what a doctor can just. You can't look at someone and say, oh, here's their MRI result. You need a tool, but we can do that with 80% accuracy. And what are we competing against? 35% accuracy. It's less than a coin flip right now. And so, we're not trying to replace the neurologist. That's not our opportunity. Our opportunity is to help make the neurologist able to serve the patient and make more money. Literally. I mean, if you're helping more patients, it's natural that you'll be more profitable. You'll be more effective with your time. The neurologist who sees the patient wants to help, but right now they can't. Those questions, the current standard of care is blocking them from being able to understand, what's wrong with this patient and how do I help? Critically, how do I know if the therapy is working? A lot of neurologists, they start to help the patient, but they just don't know if it's being successful or not. They have to follow up with the patient for years. And sometimes, it's very frustrating to find out that the therapy wasn't having the effect that you need. So the biggest opportunity for us is to keep the practice in the hands of the neurologist. So instead of referring the patient to a neuropsychologist or referring them to a PET scan lab or an MRI, let the neurologist do the scan themselves. Let them use our product and figure out themselves, okay, this is the type of test I should run. Because a PET scan is only useful for some neurological disorders. It's not useful across all of them. And so there's nothing more frustrating than being this detective who, doesn't know what tool to use. It's much more validating, at least, so my dad is a neurologist. It's much more validating to have a gut feeling of what the condition is, right? And being able to use a tool to validate your gut feeling and then to get the confirmation. Like that should be the 3 steps of diagnosis. I'm the doctor. I think this is the problem. Here's my test just to be sure. Okay, now I have my confirmation. Good to go. So that's the opportunity we want to give to the neurologist instead of, hey, do you want to use a PET scan? My friend Bob will do it for you. And then you don't see your patient for months. You have no idea if they're coming back.
Wow. Yeah, and some of these diseases, can progress so rapidly as well, and just having the ability to better diagnose just seems so absolutely critical. I think the other question
better diagnose and better treat. If I'm a neurologist, I want to help patients. I don't want to just wait for them to get bad. I want to help them today.
Yeah. Yeah. The other key thing that I wanted to ask you is in terms of the biggest challenges that you're facing as an organization. Where do you see those, and sort of what are the things that that you're having to overcome?
That's a really good question. We are a startup. We are early. I hate to say it. Everybody says it, but we are, always looking for funds. the med tech industry is, it's a big industry. There's a lot of money to be made, but that said, it's largely driven by heart. And the majority of investors who I've met are more interested in financial products. They're more interested in SaaS platforms, things that have very high margins and that are almost trivial to sell. And what we're doing is hard. We are developing a new standard of care, and as a result, it's hard for us to find financing. So it took me over a year to just hire a team instead of continuing to work by myself. And I'm very grateful now that I have my team. I can move almost 10 times faster. So I'm still looking to raise money. That still represents a challenge because of inavailability of money. Another thing that I found out through this process is that, ironically, we're not investing enough in diagnostics. A lot of investors who I speak with who say, oh, we're a biotech, we're a med tech investor, they only invest in molecules. They only invest in therapies. I mean, how much money do we have to throw into these pills before we realize that, well, we have no way to measure if they work. So, like, how are we going to get our ROI? We're already seeing that, especially in Alzheimer's disease, with some of the most recently approved drugs, where insurance refuses to cover it because it's total. Who knows if it's working? It's total BS. I mean, I should be careful with my words, but it's very hard to know if this is the right therapy for this patient specifically, and that's a problem. So that's one barrier for sure. There's not a lot of availability of funds for diagnostic companies. It's not the most attractive type of investment opportunity necessarily. And then another big challenge for us is that we are dependent, in fact, on these therapeutic companies. So if I want my product to diagnose the patient, then what is the purpose? The purpose is, of course, to administer a therapy. And so I am reliant on these therapies having a successful outcome. In the case of certain neurological disorders, there are plenty of therapies. And in others, those therapies are somewhat new. I'm proud to say that Alzheimer's disease has a lot of therapies already approved and that have been around for decades. But that said, it still is a newer space than, for example, cardiovascular problems. And so as a result, we do have therapies, but they're not the best necessarily. The best therapy that I can think of for Alzheimer's will add 5 years of high functional quality of life for you, which in my opinion is, you don't want to ignore that. But 5 years is a long time. But at the same time, it doesn't stop the disease. So these are definitely some obstacles for us. And finding these partners as well to work with us is somewhat of a challenge. They can be somewhat siloed and competitive.
So I'm going to turn it back to you in just a second, but I wanted to just to acknowledge two things. So Justin Lehman said that you're talking about really interesting stuff, and he really appreciates us sharing the interview live. So thanks a lot, Justin, for reaching out on LinkedIn. I greatly appreciate that. And the second thing I wanted to sort of challenge anybody on the drug industry side as well as on the investor side. So I really think, and I've been helping a few companies sort of through this process, but I really think there's a true opportunity in diagnostics for people to kind of open their eyes. Yes, just like you said a minute ago, James, certainly diagnostics can indicate, hey, let's go leverage this drug. So there's a direct correlation there for, a lot of the drug companies to want the diagnostics as well. But in addition to that, I mean, oftentimes from the investor side, your pathway and the speed from, an idea or proof of concept in the lab through technology lock all the way through to final device FDA approved is a lot faster. And so from an investment perspective, it's kind of baffling to me because I look at it and I'm like, okay, so, I mean, sure, you could have the next breakthrough drug. I mean, and what is it? Less than 7% of them will make it through stage 3 clinical trials. And so, the idea of your investment actually landing is a lot narrower. But sure, I mean, it's a great investment, a great space to invest in. Not saying that people shouldn't invest in drugs because, I don't want somebody to walk away from this and think, my goodness, it's, not what we should do. Because we need the next breakthrough cancer drug. We need T cell therapies
Too.
and NK therapies. And, we need the next Parkinson's drug and Alzheimer's drug. I mean, those things are needed. But at the same time, whenever I look at diagnostics and, whenever I hear people, kind of hold back because the diagnostic at the end of the day isn't curing the problem, but at the same time having better information is a big part of getting to that point of if not curing it, at least diagnosing faster, treating people. So
Yeah, and
critical.
one of the things I like about being a diagnostic is I get to, in a way, act like an investor because all of these pharmaceuticals, all these therapies, they're looking for me. Without a tool like mine, they don't get the insurance to cover them. They don't get paid, which is what people build businesses for, right? And so I'm in this privileged opportunity where we can collaborate with all these pharmaceutical companies. We can sign licensing agreements. We can even sign revenue share models. So, it doesn't matter to me who succeeds. If someone succeeds, they're still using my product. And the brilliant move that we've done here too is because these you can't see that the therapy is working, you do need some type of brain imaging technology like ours to make sure it's working. We can actually be, in a way, a subscription model where the patient uses us not only to diagnose and intervene, but also to monitor, make sure that it's working well. You may have to modify the dosage a couple months down the road in order to have the optimal recovery. And so I think that we're in a very good position to continue to be profitable, to support these therapies as they develop their, as they present their results and optimize their dosage and application. And I think that what that means is that we succeed alongside them. So we've positioned ourselves as the highest resolution, best of class diagnostic tool, and we will find the therapy that matches us for each disease category.
So important. Well, James, I like to ask every guest the same three questions. And so my first question for
Well,
you as we end the interview is, what inspires you?
that's a great question. What inspires me? I have to say that it's really my parents. They're both physicians. So my mom is anesthesiologist. My dad is a neuroradiologist. I learned that the brain is a very complicated organ. I grew up with CT scans and X-rays on my kitchen table while I'm eating cereal, looking at a picture of a brain. So I've always been inspired by my parents. They're both very hardworking, and I also see the challenges of their job. There's nothing that matters more to them than saving a patient's life or being helpful to a patient. I remember my dad being on call, during the holidays on vacation, and he would never complain about it or anything. Like, when he got a phone call, he was excited. He's like, "Yes, I get to help people." But then I also remember the times that he was frustrated and he doesn't know what to do with this patient. You get that aha at the end when you finally run the right test. Oh, we had to image with this way and this part of the brain and or part of the body. And I just want to make it easier for people like my dad to get to that point of, okay, I'm ready to help the patient. I figured out the problem.
Yeah, so important. What concerns you?
What concerns me? Um, I try not to think about the finance thing. That's always been a risk for me. That's why it's always on my mind. But
As
I would
any
say that
as
my
any
biggest
entrepreneur,
concern,
yeah.
yeah, exactly, as any entrepreneur. Soon, though, it's not going to be as much of a problem. I think that this is the last year that we fundraise, especially if we're in the market by the end of the year. But what concerns me after that would be, uh, I still want to make sure that we are measuring cognition to the level of precision that insurance would care about. I think we've taken a great strategy in terms of leveraging, visual dysfunctions. I think if someone can't see very well, or at least we can prove that their vision is affected, I think that that's a direct correlation with quality of life. I think that there will be some people who challenge that assumption. Certainly, you have corrective lenses and things like this. And so they may make the argument that, well, maybe the visual deficit is not very big. Maybe there's some minor thing that can enhance it. Therefore, it's not a quality of life problem. That would make me very sad if there were some challenges on that side. Another challenge that I'm concerned with is how quickly can we heal a person? So if we identify that there's a disorder, we give them a therapy. Maybe we even show that the therapy is slowing the disease, stopping it maybe completely. Can we show that a person is getting better? And that is going to be a question on my mind for the years to come. That's going to take a lot of time to show. And since we don't have the endpoints, we're essentially becoming the first endpoint for measuring cognitive ability objectively. It's going to be very difficult for us to know that someone's improving.
Very, very important. Thank you for sharing that. And the last question, what excites you?
Speaking with people like you, Don, there's nothing that excites me more than sharing ideas and learning from other people, to be honest. When I started off as an entrepreneur and as a scientist, I thought it was so important to come up with the best ideas and to think of things that no one has thought of before. And, through trial and error mostly, right? Making mistakes, learning, you get to this point where you realize everyone is your teacher. And the job of a truly talented scientist and a truly talented entrepreneur is to, surround yourself with brilliant minds and figuring out what they know and how can you combine all of these ideas together in order to create something small that solves a problem that is also small, but the outcome is huge. Like I said before, my concept of having the patient open their eyes and watch a video, it's relatively new. And that's what makes it small. But the outcome, the side effect is that now, we can do these amazing things. We can extract these endpoints from this patient without doing a lumbar puncture, without doing a PET scan. It's truly amazing to me. And so that's what excites me. I love now to recognize the genius in everyone around me and to bring that genius together, put a spotlight on it, and recognize that, I don't have to be the smartest person in the room. I just have to have the biggest ears.
Yeah. I also enjoy continual learning, and I nonstop. I feel like I'm the least smart person in the room around a lot of you brilliant people. So thank you so much for being a guest here on the Life Science Success Podcast. I greatly appreciate your time and for you being here.
Thank you, Don. It's a pleasure.
Thanks so much.
Thank you for listening to Life Science Success. For complete details about this podcast, including show notes, how to get in touch with guests, and more episodes, please visit www.lifesciencesuccess.com. If there's someone you'd like for us to invite to the show as a guest, please let me know by sending me a message at the podcast website. Please click subscribe on your favorite podcast app, share the podcast, or tell a friend about it. And last but not least, rate the podcast. Thank you again.